Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. The New York Times this week reported on a series of studies showing an astonishingly high unemployment rate among young black men, with incarceration rivaling a weekly paycheck as the norm in a high number of cities. And a study by NYC Works Initiative, a joint venture by the City Council and United Way of New York City, showed that unemployment statistics drastically underestimate the number of New Yorkers who are unemployed. The city's employment-to-population ratio, a measure that more completely measures growing joblessness, shows that just 54% of New Yorkers, or just over half, are productively engaged in the labor market. Throw into that distressing mix the changing demographic and economic factors affecting the economy. Many of the jobs in the city's dominant FIRE sector, which stands for finance, insurance, and real estate, have been outsourced to places like India and Taiwan. And even as the number of manufacturing jobs dwindles, the continuing influx of immigrants competing with native-born residents makes it tougher to get those remaining entry-level jobs that traditionally provided the poor with access to the first rung on the economic ladder. Race and gender persist as well as factors hindering upward advancement for those who do have jobs, as evidenced by recent reports on how women have yet to seriously intrude into the clubby male preserve of top law firm partnerships. We're joined by four New Yorkers to talk about the state of work in the city and beyond. Ana Oliveira is the president and CEO of the New York Women's Foundation, which works to enhance the ability of young women to economically survive and thrive. Ann Rascone is the executive director of Non-Traditional Employment for Women, or NEW, a remarkable agency that trains women to break into the male-dominated world of unionized building trades. Linda Bailey is a professor in Baruch College's School of Public Affairs, and Emmanuel Ness is professor of political science at my alma mater at Brooklyn College. Ana Oliveira, let me start with you. What kind of programs exist for women in particular, young women in particular, trying to break into this changing job market?
Well, let me say, Bob, that first, there aren't enough programs, and there aren't necessarily programs that are as holistic as they need to be. The foundation is concerned, we are concerned with working with women and young girls who are living in conditions of poverty and creating the situations and supporting organizations that are creating situations so that from a very early age, there is like enough emotional support, self-confidence, the instilling opportunities for access to literacy programs, to educational opportunities for girls. For women, we are very interested in not only supporting certainly educational and academic success. We know that, I mean, a very high number, over 80% of those with bachelor's degrees leave poverty, really can get out of poverty. So from our point of view, it's very important to support programs that also, such as, Ann's program, that also create access to women in non-traditional occupations because of the issues around living wage. It's really important that not only women be working, that men be working as well, but that the wage itself be a living wage so that we're not creating situations in which we are enlarging the working poor, but that folks actually are already working and don't have the means to, maintain a standard of living that is out of poverty. So that's a really important thing for us. And I just wanted to say that in addition, the ability to, we have many things at play. We have the need for opportunities with education, opportunities in the job market, diverse opportunities in the job market. But we also have the need for what we call wraparound support, so that actually, a person can actually one feel that it is something that belongs to them, to seize those opportunities. And second, that they have the emotional support to continue once they access school, once they access employment, to succeed, to continue and succeed.
And she cited NEW. Those of you who walk around the city and see the bus shelter ads have been very effective. She talked about a living wage. It says that they average that workers in the construction trades average $53,000 a year, if I remember my bus ads correctly. Women breaking into an all-male preserve, in essence. Where do these women come from? What are they doing before they come to NEW?
Most of the women that come to us, it's a pretty diverse population. So they come from all 5 boroughs. Most of the women that we serve are unemployed, underemployed, and typically a typical woman is doing a traditional job, working as a bank teller, working as a grocery clerk, being a home health aide. Very, very traditional pursuits for women.
Are they unemployed women, or are they people on welfare, or are they?
The majority of our women are unemployed or underemployed. There's a large percentage of our women who are on public assistance who have been dislocated from their jobs, so they're on unemployment. So there's different kinds of public benefits that they're receiving when they come into our program.
Linda, we've seen in this city and across the country the vast immigrant influxes, in essence competing for some of the same jobs that native New Yorkers, that were native-born Americans. We're all the, I'm the grandchild of immigrants. I'm quite sensitive to immigration questions. How is this playing itself out?
Well, there's a lot of people who argue that immigrants take jobs away from natives, but when you actually look at the data and the evidence out there, there's really not a lot of evidence that that's actually happening. If there were a fixed set of jobs, so there were, say 10 jobs in New York, and then there were 10 New Yorkers and immigrants came in, if there were only 10 jobs, and then you would take away the job from the one person. But then when an immigrant comes here, the jobs don't remain fixed. Immigrants attract a lot of companies into areas because they particularly might lower costs. Immigrants also provide demand for things like housing and other services, and so there's an effective immigration that people don't normally talk about, which is they increase the demand for other kinds of workers and jobs. The other thing that they do, which people may not talk about, is that they pay taxes as well. And a lot of the immigration is high-skilled immigration as well. And so high-skilled immigration, if it sort of competes and then lowers costs, some people think it's maybe a good thing. If you, for example, a lot of nurses that come into this country help keep healthcare costs. So imagine if there were no immigrant nurses in places like Florida, then what you would end up having is a shortage of nurses. And well, there is a shortage of nurses. There are lots of jobs for nurses and people not there to fill those jobs for whatever reason. So immigrants do a lot of positive things as well. And it's in the data what you see is that there's not really this negative effect. The effects are very small. When there are negative effects, some of the effects are positive when you talk about the effect on wages related to the size of the immigrant population.
It is true that immigration, particularly in Washington right now, is a whipping boy. I happen to agree with Linda that on balance this city wouldn't exist without the immigrant labor that we have. The kind of confusing array of anti-immigrant, pro-immigrant that kind of crosses ideological lines. There was a traditional resistance to immigration within labor unions, for instance. Right. So I mean, it doesn't really cross kind of typical ideological lines, yet it's critical for what the future of work is going to look like in this city, in this country.
Right. I actually think that one of the reasons why many jobs go begging is because they don't pay enough. And that so, for instance, if we were to pay nurses better wages or to treat them with better working conditions, there would not be a great need for immigrant nurses from the Philippines as there is today. I mean, there's a lot of evidence of that, although they are enhancing the economy and also paying taxes and helping people survive in hospitals. Yes, indeed, the Washington elections of this year are going to be in a large extent revolving around migration issues. There have been 2 bills that have been proposed, some that would restrict migration to a great extent through a guest worker program, so the unauthorized migration would not take place. Some of the people that you see are paid very low wages, and yes, they make New York City a vibrant city, but at a cost, because they are paid low wages and they can't afford to feed themselves, and the issue of and house themselves, etc. And the issue of women unable to pay for essential living costs is a direct extension of unauthorized migration and the fact that many of them get paid below living wage. And that living wage is extremely important precisely because, and just getting back to the issue of race, that there has been a decline, a tremendous decline in the public sector. The jobs that African Americans and Latinos and many other migrants who've made the city great have relied upon for decent wages, decent benefits, housing, education, healthcare, and so forth.
But those are the same jobs in previous generations were held by the Irish, held by the Jews, held by the Italians. I mean, what's going on here is in many ways a very traditional American story. The skins may be darker, the accents may be different, but it's essentially, socioeconomically, a very similar story, isn't it?
I don't think so. I actually think that we're seeing a restructuring of the economy that probably began in the 1980s. And New York City is a very different place. If you take a look at the numbers, there were about 7 million New Yorkers in 1980. In 2000, that number rose to 8 million. Mm-hmm. And in large measure as a result of migration, male and female migration.
Of immigration, yes.
And immigration and migration. Right. And this guest worker program is a way to restrict migration of what are referred to as unauthorized migrants or undocumented migrants, and create a migration program that would only allow people to stay here for a specific amount of time, seasonal workers. And women work in farms, and although that's declining, but women are exploited in the hospitality industry throughout the country, and including New York City. And I think we're going to see that happen if this legislation that's being sponsored by Senator Specter and the Representative Sensenbrenner go through. They really want to create a restrictive migration program, and they're going after industries where wages, they're saying that people don't want jobs. Well, in fact, people do want jobs if they'll pay enough. I mean, you know, if you're
how much of a motivation? I mean, $53,000 a year is, you know, pretty good money for anybody,
it's a nice
especially
paycheck.
the people. It isn't. I mean, how do you get the sense that that's the motivation for people?
Well, I think the women that we serve and who are attracted to this industry, they want to be economically self-sufficient, and with that kind of, we work exclusively in the union construction sector, and these jobs not only provide a fantastic wage, but also offer medical benefits and pension and annuity. It's a great way to make a living, and it's very hard, I think, to access the American dream here in New York City. It's a very, very difficult place to live. And with these kinds of jobs, I think a woman has the option to stake out the kind of life she wants to lead, whether it's invest in her education, buy a house, raise her kids. I think what makes a woman powerful, besides a fat paycheck, is being able to decide where she wants to live and determine how she wants to live.
You were talking also about poor women in particular, but we've seen such a disparity of wealth that, you know, in terms of how the economy has shifted since the 1980s, you know, moving more to a service economy, less from people actually producing things. I mean, just so you know, union construction jobs are one of the few jobs you can say you can't really outsource, because you can't outsource construction. Although you probably could find a way to do it.
Yes.
In the work that the foundation does, I mean, this disparity, the idea of the shrinking middle class, and this inability. I mean, you know, healthcare, housing costs; these are all factors in trying to hold a job in this city.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, in a globalized world, the one that we have, we probably would tend to look at the individuals, you know, at immigrants or at groups, and say, you know, there's something about that is, you know, first generation, second generation folks that, you know, have been in the country for centuries. But the reality is as you pointed out, that jobs also migrate. You know, that there are forces that are so much bigger that actually shape very much the opportunities and the behavior of individuals. Because of that, we are interested in addressing what we think are some of the root causes that are universal for everyone. And that has to do with the conditions of our lives, that be a person that comes from a family that has been here 3 generations, 10 generations, n number of generations, or just came. That the issues of opportunity, access to education, ability to demand living wages and organize, communities organizing ourselves in a way that the working conditions change, that the opportunities, the issues around prejudice, not just around, women's access, but you talked about a very high rate of unemployment for black men. And so those kinds of issues that really, we believe, actually unite us, in relation to the driving forces, which is a job market that preys on instilling a certain competition, I think, and in keeping and reducing the access to education. I mean, we look at the policies around subsidies for education, public education, support for scholarships decreasing. And that is, we know, one of the critical vehicles that changes the opportunities in the job market,
Just wanted to comment on something Manuel said earlier. The competition among for jobs between immigrants and natives, and I think we want to maybe think a little bit about what would happen if the immigrants weren't there. Would these people suddenly have a lot of jobs? And as I mentioned before, I think there's evidence that the influx of immigrants has not lowered the wage drastically of less skilled workers. And so what's happening is that there's a lot of job creation also going on. Companies are remaining in the U.S. because of this lower cost that makes them more competitive internationally. And so if you didn't have these immigrants, maybe that company that might locate in New York, that might remain open in New York because there's the immigrants maybe keeping wages at a particular level, that company isn't going to exit right away, or it may remain here longer, remain open longer. And so the idea that you might sort of restrict immigration.
But, right, no, frankly, I don't think you can restrict immigration, because I don't believe that people move to this country based on some aggregate social statistic. They move one by one because they see an opportunity and they're trying to better their own lives. So with all due respect to social science, I think people do this one at a time. And, setting aside questions of political refugees, but in terms of the vast majority of people, whether they're coming across the Rio Grande or they're coming from the Dominican Republic on a plane, or coming from Eastern Europe or Ireland or anywhere. But you talk about that. It seems to me inherent in what you're saying is that immigrants, by providing a larger labor pool, are helping to hold down wage levels that encourage companies to stay here.
Or attract companies into New York.
And it just seems that that's a double-edged sword in the kinds of work that you do. Or am I misreading this?
Well, I'm not arguing that immigrants are taking away jobs from African American New Yorkers or any New Yorker. First of all, we've seen a 3-decade-long exodus of white New Yorkers that started in the 70s. Secondly, I would argue that what I pointed out before, that privatization and contracting has created very low-wage jobs that most African Americans and other people of color may not be able to survive on in New York City. They're educated people who have gone through high school and so forth and don't want to accept a job for $3 or $4 an hour because regulations. I know that Attorney General Spitzer has worked on these subjects with codes of conduct and so forth. But I think the argument is that the living wage laws that have been put into place are good, but they're limited to a very small amount of people, and that many of the jobs that have been outsourced to migrant workers, and they've been absolutely beneficial to the New York City economy, and we should support them, they've been de-unionized over the years because unions have become very weak politically, not only around the country, but in New York City as well. And so if we take a look at, for instance, the issue of building trades, the people who service the buildings, we're finding that many buildings are serviced by non-union immigrant workers, not just in New York City, but in the region as a whole. And as a consequence, those jobs were at one time union jobs. Many of them were staffed by by African American workers. I mean, New York City is somewhat the exception to the rule, but nationwide, those jobs have become deunionized. But without question, I would agree with you that there is a effect on the New York City economy that cannot be underestimated, that immigrants do benefit the economy as a whole. Whether they lower wage rates or not is another question. I mean, I don't think that any job that's been created, or virtually any job in the unskilled and semi-skilled areas, have grown in wages. If we take a look at, for instance, grocery clerks, we take a look at transport workers, taxi drivers, domestic workers, and so forth and so on, those are the lowest wage jobs in the labor market, where people work full-time or more and take home $15,000 at most. I even think amongst the construction workers, we're finding women in particular being exploited. For instance, amongst asbestos workers, people who cleaned up the World Trade Center mess, there was a lot of asbestos. Many of them were women, and many of them lost their jobs and they were paid very low wages. I mean, hopefully those issues will be addressed by your organization. But construction also has become an issue of lowering the wages, because I just talked to somebody at the Department of Health, and the predictions are, or estimates are, that 50% of all construction work is not in the downtown areas, the business districts, but are, you know, rehab jobs and so forth that don't pay hardly a decent wage. Yeah.
Yet the unions sit on a lot of the construction unions that traditionally resisted, racial integration, let alone gender integration, right, in the past, sit on your board. And are they welcoming? Is it kind of like an acknowledgement of reality, or you have to be careful at your board?
Well, I wanted to speak to this idea that if there are wages that seem to be lower, you're seeing that in the non-union sector, mm-hmm, and a lot of the work happening, the major development work happening in the city is union. The work happening in Lower Manhattan is going to be all union, and that's where you find the high wages. And again, when women come to our organization, they see these union high-wage construction jobs as a vehicle out of poverty and into self-sufficiency. And it's a really great time right now for women to move into, women and minorities actually, be considering this industry. Besides, there's a tremendous growth in the construction industry that's being forecast right now, coupled with some really great policy initiatives coming out of the Bloomberg administration that will support the entrance of more women and minorities into the trades. So I think this is a really interesting juncture for the city.
But when you talk about the non-union jobs, you see a lot of, what we used to call fly-by-night companies who would pick up day laborers that don't have benefits, that don't have protection, are often paid off the books. They're both immigrants and non-immigrants. That's not just an immigrant problem at all.
That's right.
And it's, you see it largely in the outer boroughs. The largest projects, and fortunately for the union industry, for the unionized workforce, there's a lot of building going on, not only in Lower Manhattan, but almost every large building that's going up in this city is going to be a union job. And I think that I think you have a better quality. You have a better expectation of quality if I'm going to walk into that building, which you don't necessarily have when you see the kinds of building collapses where there was that terrible story in Williamsburg that Jimmy Breslin wrote the book about, the short, sweet dream of Edward Gutierrez, I think it was. I recommend to everybody. About a Mexican from Puebla, I believe it was, who literally drowned in cement because they hadn't shored up properly the third floor, I believe it was, of a construction. That's unfortunately more and more the case, as opposed to the kinds of union jobs which are much more quality jobs. I think, and that's, I think, is some degree a price that we all pay. So,
I think absolutely there is a growth in day laborers in New York City who are in the construction
in essence, an
industry.
underground economy.
Yeah, and a lot of them are in the, actually, they may not be in the central business districts, but these are the people who may replace windows or do rehab in apartment buildings and so forth. And the they get paid very low wages and they don't have any benefits, and there's not a union hiring hall. I think it's great that construction companies and so forth are working with unions to diversify the labor force, although I don't think there's enough of it, frankly, particularly amongst African Americans. If you look at the construction worker labor force today, I think even amongst unions it's 50% or so are going there. But a lot of the lower wage jobs in those industries, if you take a look at demolition, asbestos removable, and hazardous waste, are going to workers of color, particularly immigrant workers, along with this whole economy, this underground economy of day laborers, where people work on short contracts and are not unionized whatsoever.
Or no contracts at all.
Yeah.
Right. Let's look ahead. I mean, as you look at the kind of work that you do with women in particular, but even broader than that, what's the future of work look like? I mean, what kinds of profiles could we expect? give them a hint as to what should they be looking at? Something other than day laboring on construction jobs.
Yes,
right.
yes.
Right.
I think that certainly for me, before I can do that, I think that we are interested in some of the things that we need to do in order to we're all identifying a series of kind of very mixed situations, right? I mean, I think we all are involved here in this conversation around the challenges of a very large group of people, let's say in New York City, we're a very diverse group of people, dealing with realities that are primarily unfavorable. Very unfavorable to most persons. You talked about the growing distance and disparity between the very, very wealthy and the majority of New Yorkers. And in order for us to begin to address that in the future, thinking about your question, I think that we need to talk about what are the kinds of opportunities and support, what are the critical specific programmings, both that the nonprofit sector as well as government, and the policies that need to be in place that support the movement the other way of that growing disparity, which is really lifting up the bottom of that disparity, which is the level of poverty. And some of those things we know that actually have worked. And we know, for instance, that in the U.S., the Head Start programs had an incredible impact in lifting children in families that were living in poverty level out of poverty and create educational opportunities that help them succeed and sustain and go and get degrees. We know that
it's a socialization process. Isn't it?
Absolutely, but also literacy skills, thinking skills. We know that, for instance, currently in public schools, it's critical to offer a quality meal for kids. That's a critical factor in the success, the attention span, ability to learn. We know that there are wraparound services such as childcare that adults need access to in order for them to pursue their education and job opportunities. So that actually it's not too difficult for us to think of a future in which the ability for New Yorkers to compete in a job market that is, with job migrations to other centers, with different demands in skills and different opportunities in professions, nursing and others, that we need to support, our communities to be able to actually access those opportunities.
I think you're talking about job migration to other places, and I just want to come back to the issue of unions, not in the construction industry, which, debatable whether those could be outsourced in terms of building homes elsewhere and just shipping them to New York or something like that. But the ability of a company, say, to pay workers a living wage and then compete with another company that's going to have the outsourced, job things that they would have done at, hiring a New Yorker instead of somebody else. The ability of you, a company that wants to do that, to compete, realistically, you're probably going to be priced out of the market unless people in New York you know, say, well, this company's hiring New Yorkers instead, and we'll buy from them. And I don't think people do that in general. People are going to look at the prices, and they themselves have, you know, low wages. They're going to try and buy what's gonna, you know, what fits into their budget. They're not going to look at, you know, made in China versus made in the U.S. Did this company hire lots of New Yorkers, or did this company outsource some of their finance work?
One of the things, going to go to a question, but you talk about the kinds of education. You do a lot of math training, for instance, for the women. I mean, the women get more than just physical training. I mean, there's a lot of other things you do with that.
Right. And they learn how to use tools.
And they learn how to use tools. I'm going to tell me your name and the campus you're from, please, and speak up.
My name is Lina Walters, and I'm coming from the Staten Island College. I'm majoring right now in political science, and I'm going to graduate this summer. And I have a question for Ms. Oliveira or Ms. Rascon. How is going to be the job market I'm going to face right now when I'm going to, you know, look for a job? Because I'm a woman, middle age, I'm an immigrant, and I need to know what is the environment I'm going to face, because I was looking for a job 6 years ago. I quit my job, and now to finish college. So the job market I faced 6 years ago is not the job market I'm going to face right now.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I think you have a terrific asset. That is your college degree. That you know, does create and opens up access to opportunities that 6 years ago, without that, you didn't have. I think that creates opportunities for you to be in a playing field with, you know, with much more of a living wage in terms of jobs. And even as the market, the job market in New York opens up in some ways and shifts in other ways, that type of asset tends to be a very beneficial asset that gives you entrance in another layer that you didn't have before. It's a significant qualitative indicator of better access to jobs. I don't know, Anne.
I was going to add that pursuing more education is certainly
Yes.
creating the groundwork to move into, to have more options. And my vantage point is very, very specific, which is construction. So I can only talk about the future of construction for women, but I think that obtaining more education and job experience is really what opens up more opportunities.
Yes, sir. Tell us your name and your campus, please.
Okay. Good evening. First, I want to say thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
What's your name and your campus?
My name is Daoud King. I'm from Brooklyn College. And my question is referring to the subway strike. From an outsider standpoint, I'm of the opinion that it was arguably unsuccessful. I would like to know what you all's opinion about that was, as well as what do you think how do you think it bodes for, but how does it fit for the future of unions? Because it pretty much, you know, undermined the unions in New York City. So I'd like to know more about that.
You want to tackle?
I think it was a mixed success. I actually think that by and large it was a success, because it was the first time that a union challenged the Taylor Law in a very long time. And transit workers, as a rule, have been the most militant workers, and in the past, when they went on strike, the Taylor Law came into effect, but workers tended to be treated better. Now, the contract that was negotiated was a concessionary contract only in some areas, but there were some very significant areas where the TWU was very steadfast, and that most important was the one that they would not allow the next generation of workers to be treated to lower pensions, lower wages, and so forth.
Which has happened in everything from the police department to all kinds of other private sector unions as well, where you kind of negotiate to protect your existing people and give in for the people who, for the unborn, I think was the word that Roger Toussaint. But what happened in the transit strike, the give back was in the area of healthcare, which is part of a larger, health is one of those future industries, I think, as we all, speaking for myself, get older and older, and healthcare is going to be a larger and larger portion of the economy, and it's already a very large sector. But it's the give back on healthcare that I think that is indicative of the kinds of changing work environment that we're all going to have to face in the future. So I think that the transit strike is a very important strike. I actually was very impressed. I thought New Yorkers generally were very supportive. On balance, understood what the transit workers were pushing. You had a lot of kvetching because we're New Yorkers, but that on balance, and I got to ride my bike 8 miles a day to and from work and live to tell about it. Yes, sir. Tell us your name and your campus, please.
Hi, my name is Rudy Mason. I'm from John Jay College. This question is for Professor Ness. According to the legislation proposed for the guest worker program, new immigrants will be allowed to stay and work in the U.S. for a period of time. However, how does this legislation address the lack of enforcement of current illegal immigration laws? And secondly, how would the guest worker program affect current illegal immigrants?
There are many guest worker programs that are being sponsored by members of Congress, and the President has his own that would provide for a guest worker program that would be highly punitive and encourage workers to go back home very quickly. And these are exactly the jobs that we're talking about that I think have been lost over the last 2-3 decades. Jobs in the retail industry, jobs in the hospitality industry, and so forth. And one can go even further, jobs in the high-tech industry, where there has been a guest worker program that has been official. What's happening now is that workers come for a specific period of time and then they're forced to go home. They have no rights to strike. The ILO conventions number, I believe, 79 and 143 are completely ignored by the United States, in which American...
That's the International Labor Organization.
Right, International Labor Organization. One of the main points is that American companies are supposed to first find out if there are workers in the United States willing to take those jobs. But now that jobs, the minimum wage in most states has not gone up at all, it's very hard to find people willing to take those jobs. We talk about living wages. I think that we need more than living wages. I think we need a massive worker program in this country.
Is it the McCain bill, the McCain-Kennedy bill, which would actually deal more with the undocumented workers here now, which would give them, through paying a fine and a certain period of time, would actually be able to put them on a path towards legalization. That
some
seems
of them, yeah.
So so there are a lot of different ideas out there, but I do think that there is a punitive attitude, at least in Washington, towards immigrants. You want to?
I just wanted to make one comment. Findings from my own research on the effect of illegal immigrants in places that have very high immigrant populations, like the New Yorks, like the Californias. There's more competition, but in places that has a small immigrant proportion of the population, it's actually beneficial. And the idea there is, of course, the jobs just won't exist. People won't locate. Companies that are in the Midwest or something like that, where there is maybe not, not a large immigrant pool. If they have the guest workers come in, they can locate and have they'll increase jobs for natives as they hire people, maybe to do some of the low wage jobs that natives, and I hate to say this because I know you might object, don't want in some sense because they're low wage, but that lower cost base kind of job enables some other kinds of jobs, and so it actually increases the employment opportunities in some of these low immigrant states, and it's higher paid jobs for the natives.
These, of course, also are not problems unique to the United States. You see it all across Europe as well, and a lot of the industrialized world.
I'm surprised. I just spoke to a professor from Vanderbilt University down in Cornfield, and he's arguing in places like Nashville And look at Tyson Foods, for instance, where you have undocumented workers who are getting paid below minimum wage. Tyson says, oh, no, we're not employing them, we're contracting them out. And so we have nothing to do with them. We've heard the same thing with Walmart and many other large corporations where they lock people into the stores and so forth. I think that this really diminishes the whole notion of what it means to be a worker, what it means to have this form of reciprocity, where I do agree that there are jobs that are created as a consequence of keeping certain jobs here, but take a look at the meatpacking industry. For instance, the Austin, Minnesota strike some 10, 15 years ago, where workers were getting paid $9 an hour, and the company that makes Spam decided that they were going to cut the wages. And most of these jobs across the Midwest, Iowa, Minnesota, and so forth, are now dominated by migrant workers. Fine, but I think that we should consider the fact that they get paid a decent wage. I have no problem with that at all. But
let me just also point out, to do a little commercial, that Professor Ness has a book called Immigrants, Unions, and the New U.S. Labor Market, which I assume deals with a number of these issues. Yes, ma'am. Tell us your name and your campus, please.
Hi, Jacqueline Scarlato, Brooklyn College. The question is for the entire panel. I just want to know, I know the main concentration tonight is women in the workforce, but where do we envision, you know, migrant workers in the labor workforce 20, 30 years from now?
Boy, there's a nice small question.
Well, I'd personally like to see the workforce better reflect the population of New York City. So 30 years from now, I think the ratios will be different.
I guess that there are some assumptions that, assuming that that there's not an immigration crackdown, that if there is an immigration crackdown, that the undocumented who have demonstrated a success in getting here, whether it's overstaying a visa or sneaking into the country, will continue to do that. Whether there will be this, downward pressure on wages in order to employ them, exploit them, choose your word. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions as to where. As the in particular this city, I mean, my grandparents, for instance, who arrived here from Eastern Europe in 1910 and 1915, were in some ways didn't have a lot of the protections that people have today. I mean, do you have a sense of where we look? I do think that healthcare is going to be even bigger because I'm going to be in my 80s. So
you keep getting older and older.
20, 30 years from now, I'm hearing Ann talk about more integrated labor force that reflects more the city. Then 20, 30 years from now, I want to see some policies and some changes that really address some of the issues of low-paying jobs, period, for whatever the status of the person is vis-a-vis immigration, residency, citizenship, because we're talking about less about that and much more, I think, at the bottom line, how the job market preys on all those varieties of issues to keep jobs very low.
But isn't the larger question, you talked about the globalized economy, and to the degree that money can move across borders,
yes.
Just as people can move across borders.
Absolutely.
And we are in a competitive situation, and if I own the widget company and I can, employ somebody making, I can pay somebody $2 in Thailand, or I have to pay them $6 or $7 minimum here, is this a realistic? I mean, are we hoping against hope, is it realistic?
I guess the thinking is that we need to then think on globalized approaches, right, and understand the economy in New York City and the job market within that context.
I mean, this gets into a discussion.
Even then, there's no reason why we can't take another leadership role in a globalized economy. How do we tackle the issues of a potentially growing decrease in the wages?
But you also, but the degree to which you talked about housing and education,
absolutely,
this also gets into trade policy. I mean, we're having a time to deal with this now, but you slap excise taxes on import duties on products coming in and to try to offset the wage differential. Mm-hmm. These are what I would call kind of the nativist impulse you're seeing in in Congress and some of these immigration bills. Also, there's, it's also combined with kind of protectionist impulses. So it's very, very, it's very complicated. It's a whole range of
people should
yes.
just one point. People should recognize that in, I would say, 30 years, the UN predicts that the global population will double. And if we think about that, I think there will be too few jobs for everybody.
Well, not if productivity increases, keep up with the population growth. So the technology is going to improve, and we're going to be able to do more with the things that we have. I just wanted to make another point about in 30 years. One of the things that people worry about the immigrants competing and the particularly the Hispanic group maybe going on, but sort of leaving behind African Americans. One of the other issues is that I see jobs demanding bilingual skills, and right. It's something in terms of you talking about education. Yes. People might need to get that additional language in order to actually improve the skills that they can sell, and in order to get the jobs that will exist.
Precisely, that language proficiency gives an immigrant an advantage in a global economy, and it's something that a lot of us who are born here are hampered by our inability to speak. I speak a little bit of a number of languages, but I'm not fluent even in English. So, let me go. Tell me your name and your campus, please.
My name is Darnell Small. I represent Brooklyn College. My question is addressed in the panel. Understanding the intersection of gender and race, I want to know what were the methods used to promote or enhance women's participation in the workforce, and do you argue that we use these same methods to address the African American male unemployment dilemma that we face currently today?
I think that's a really great question. I think to perhaps rephrase this is how to better integrate women and minorities into the workforce, into different job sectors. And what we're finding in construction, earlier I said that this is a really bright time for women to be entering the construction industry because for two reasons. There's a tremendous amount of growth job-wise that's being forecast, and there's also I think some really great policy initiatives that are coming out of the Bloomberg administration to support the entrance of other populations that have historically been excluded from this industry. So
the question of the African American unemployment rate.
I just say that I know a lot of people who have been in construction who are African American, and they are the first to be blamed for cleaning up the union. I won't mention any unions in particular. And so, for instance, if a union is in trusteeship, because we know many that are, because of violations of various laws, government laws, and whether they're fair or not, that's the case. But one of them is the fact that we don't have equal opportunity for African Americans. So they're usually the first to be blamed, the African American men, for getting the trusteeship in, which costs the union money and so forth. And I'm happy that construction unions are doing all this, and I think that's a positive thing, but I think we really need to address I think there's very few African Americans in these industries. I think they're dominated by women and
I think that's why we're seeing these policies.
Native-born, non-native-born African Americans or people of color.
Well, I mean,
not dominated by women, certainly.
I mean, you think about these issues obviously beyond women. I mean, this incredible problem of African American youth unemployment, particularly among males. Much worse among males than it is among females.
Mm-hmm. I think that I mean, in New York City, the investment has been, particularly around African American men, has been much more in criminalization, and their extreme overrepresentation in the criminal system than it has been in the job market, than it has been in the education sectors. And I think that, the consequences of that, the index of unemployment is a consequence of very clear social investments, I believe, extremely wrong. And that, by the time we're talking about the ability to compete in the job market, we need to talk first about what happens, and I really mean that. But the job is really almost, it's not the end, but it's a lot of things have to happen in a person's life to promote that possibility and to continue to support that possibility. And what we see is that there's not support for families. Part of the reason why the foundation focuses on women is because we understand the role that women play in a network, which is the family network, and how important that is. And I'm talking about black male kids growing up and having the opportunity and the chance to access education, to be supported, to have access to role models, to have incentives in terms of self-confidence, value, and perspective of possibility. Then we're talking about access to scholarships, if that's the case, access to support in the educational environment, job trainings that are appropriate, to promote that. So I think that, really, the amount of monies that in this state go to investment in the criminal, it's hard for me to say criminal justice system, but the criminal system versus the educational system, housing systems, and other to promote black communities that is a crime. That distribution is a crime. So when we look at those numbers, that's a consequence of that.
Yes, sir.
My name's Brian. I'm from Queens College, and my question is to the entire panel. Earlier, you spoke about how unions in New York have lost their political power in recent decades. And my question would be, aside from the building unions, how much longer can New York's other labor bases, city employees, service union employees, the airports, teachers, firemen, how long will we be able to find an entry-level position with a livable wage, given that their unions are also losing political power?
Pretty good question. I mean, part of the question in terms of government unions is the degree to which some services are being privatized, there are cities where sanitation work has now has been privatized to, either non-union or at least, if union, lower paying jobs. Do you want to tackle that?
I actually think that the last bastion of really good jobs is the public sector. And I said that originally because I think that privatization is probably the worst thing that has ever happened to African American males over the last 2 decades, because those were the jobs that were solid, that paid decent wages, not great wages, but decent wages.
That was the working middle class of the city.
Yes.
Right.
And so we're going to continue to see that public sector if people continue to advocate for services, healthcare, housing, education, and so forth. New York is losing a tremendous amount of its private sector employment base, and much of that is a result of weak unions. So that's my view.
Yes, ma'am. Time for a couple more questions.
Tanagra Bledman from York College. I have a short question. Would you agree that continuous hikes in tuition for CUNY schools will decrease enrollment and in turn keep blacks, minorities out of the job market?
You were talking about that, about CUNY.
I certainly would
CUNY is an
agree
engine,
with that.
is the traditional engine into the middle class for this city.
But
as a Brooklyn College graduate.
But I certainly would agree that access to quality, actually I should think it should be free, public education is a critical piece in the engine that we're talking about. And so I do think that not only that, but tuition growing, increasing, as well as reduction in federal funds for scholarships, for support for students, will tend to feed that disparity in wealth and poverty that we're talking about.
I just want to mention something. There was an article in The Economist about a program in CUNY where if you are a student from, I think, a New York area high school and you get certain grades,
B average, I believe it is.
You can actually, you have access to CUNY. And I think they may actually give you a stipend. And pretty much.
Well, when I went to Brooklyn College, it was in fact free. I graduated in 1970. It was. We paid $30.
Remember that.
We paid $30. I do remember. We paid $30 a semester in student fees, and when they raised it to 50, this is the late 1960s, we shut the school down, which I don't recommend as a policy prescription.
But in terms of access
but
to...
it was in fact free.
In terms of access for students, I think, as you're talking about, students have to know that they have to get the skills in the future labor market that they need. And
we just have about 2 minutes left. I want to get another last question in here.
Brooklyn College. I was wondering, do you think there's a catch-22 with all the governmental regulations that we have, like workers' comp, workers' insurance, and a lack of a nationalized health care system? Do you think it makes workers want to hire undocumented immigrants then?
I think the ability to cut costs and avoid paying benefits obviously encourages people to hire people who don't have to get those benefits. I mean, I think that's self-evident.
Yeah.
Because you talked about a job as a means to an end, the end being a better life, and it's the lack of these. Yes. It's the lack of this national health care, I guess, in particular.
Yes.
I mean,
and I think that we need to distinguish, and I appreciate very much that question because, for instance, having a quality, affordable national health plan really is a benefit for the private sector as well, because those costs are now passed to the private industry or to the workers. And I think it's that kind of thing that we need to look at for solutions 5, 10, 20 years, rather than an erosion of the quality of the jobs and the quality of the wages. That how to maintain the profit margin and the costs that you're talking about so that it's a competitive market for the companies. It's important that things like healthcare, that things, not be passed on both to the companies as well as to the workers.
Well, I'm about to run out of, if you have about a 10-second comment, that's literally what I have.
I just want people to remember that the budget, the tax revenues that the government has, they're limited. Certainly nobody wants to have more taxes coming out of their paycheck. And so the ability of the government to pay all these health care benefits, all these pensions that we're talking about, that's also limited. They can't do everything that we would like to do.
I'm getting the goodbye sign. I was a reporter for 21 years. I always make deadline. And I want to thank everybody for their rather stimulating discussion. And we will see you next time on CUNY Forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.